My daughter sent me a text at 7:43 on a Tuesday night. 3 words. Just 3 words. Remember the recipe? We don't have a recipe. We never had one. That was the point. We made it up 8 years ago after a Thanksgiving dinner that nearly ended in a screaming match between her aunt and her grandmother over something that started as a comment about stuffing and somehow became a referendum on 30 years of family grievance. My daughter was 22, home from her second year of nursing school, and she had been cornered in the kitchen by her aunt for 40 minutes while I watched from across the room and could not figure out how to extract her without igniting the whole thing. On the drive home, she said, "We need a signal, something that doesn't look like anything." I told her I'd been thinking the same thing since she was a teenager. We settled on that phrase. Remember the recipe? Sent by text, it meant, "I need you. Something is wrong. Come get me, or call me, or just be ready because I need someone outside of this situation to help me see it clearly." She was 30 years old when she used it for the first time. My name is Walt Greer. I'm 58 years old. I spent 24 years as a licensed fraud examiner and forensic accountant, the last 11 of those as a senior investigator with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division in Ohio before I left to consult independently. I have reviewed hundreds of fraud cases. I have sat across courtroom tables and conference room tables and kitchen tables from people who had lost everything, their savings, their retirement, sometimes their marriages, to schemes that, in retrospect, followed patterns so recognizable they might as well have had names. I am not easy to fool. I also want to be very clear that none of that protected my daughter from almost losing everything she had. Her name is Faye. She had been seeing a man named Corbin Lyle for about 5 months when she sent me that text. I knew a little about him. 43 years old, she'd told me, which was a 13-year gap that I had privately noted and said nothing about because she was 30 and it was not my place. He ran, or said he ran, a small commercial real estate consulting firm out of Phoenix. He'd grown up in Tennessee, she'd said. He was calm and funny and genuinely interested in her work as a cardiac step-down nurse. She'd mentioned once that he cooked well and had introduced her to a neighborhood in Columbus she'd never spent time in. She seemed happy, the kind of happy that makes a parent relieved and grateful and also, if you know what to look for, quietly watchful. I called her within 4 minutes of the text. She picked up after 2 rings and said, very carefully, in a tone I recognized as the one she used when she was managing her own breathing, "Hey Dad, you free tonight?" I said I was. I asked if she was okay. "Yeah," she said. I think I need to talk through something." She came over an hour later. My wife, Helen, had already gone to bed. Faye sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug I set in front of her and didn't say anything for a moment. I let the silence sit. I've learned over a long career that silence is not a problem to be solved. It's a room that people fill when they're ready. "He wants me to invest in something," she said. I kept my face completely neutral. "Tell me about it." She had started seeing Corbin in the spring. Things had moved quickly. She said it herself, with a self-awareness that told me she'd already been thinking about that. He was attentive in a way she wasn't used to. Called when he said he'd call. Remembered things. Showed up consistently. About 6 weeks in, he'd started mentioning, casually at first, that he had access to certain real estate syndication deals that weren't available through traditional brokerages, not pitching. Just mentioning. "The way you mention a restaurant you like. I didn't think much of it at the time," she said. "It just seemed like he was talking about his work." I nodded. Over the next few weeks, the mentions became a little more specific. A deal in Scottsdale. Returns he'd seen from a similar structure in Raleigh. He'd been careful, she said, never pushy, never urgent. Just letting the information exist in the space between them. And then 3 weeks ago, he'd sent her a document, a formal one. A private placement memorandum for something called the Ridgeway Capital Income Fund based out of Tempe, Arizona. He'd told her she didn't need to read the whole thing, that he could walk her through the relevant parts. He'd told her the minimum participation was $15,000. but that participants committing 50,000 or more got preferred return treatment and access to deals in the next round. I kept my voice level. How much do you have in your savings? She looked at the table. About 90,000. Most of it in my high-yield account. Some in my Roth. The numbers sat between us. She said he hadn't asked her yet, not directly. He'd been, and she used the word herself, building up to it. The document was there. The numbers were there. He'd told her the window on this particular fund closed at the end of the month. I asked her to forward me the document that night before she left. She looked up. Do you think it's bad? I don't know yet, I said, which was the truth. And then I said, I want you to let me look at it. That's all. You don't have to do anything tonight. You don't have to say anything to him. Just let me see the document. She forwarded it before her car left the driveway. I stayed at the kitchen table until almost 1 in the morning. The Ridgeway Capital Income Fund private placement memorandum was 41 pages long. It was well formatted. Whoever had produced it had paid attention to appearance. Clean serif fonts, a professional header, a table of contents, the kind of document that communicates legitimacy through its own presentation. Most people would look at it and feel reassured by how official it appeared. I didn't feel reassured. The fund claimed to invest in stabilized commercial real estate assets generating consistent cash flow through triple net lease structures. The projected annual return was listed as 14 to 19%. That number alone told me something. Legitimate institutional real estate funds, real ones, audited ones, registered ones, return somewhere in the range of 7 to 12% in a strong cycle. 14 to 19 is not ambitious. It's a fabrication, or it's an invitation to ask no further questions, because the number sounds too good to be remotely real. The manager of record was listed as a company called Ridgeway Capital Group, LLC. The address given was in Tempe, Arizona. I pulled it up. It was a registered agent address, the same suite number used by over 200 other business entities. Not an office. A forwarding address that cost a few $100s a year and created the appearance of a real business location. The risk disclosure section was 12 pages long and written in the kind of dense, recursive legal language specifically designed to make readers give up before they finish. I read every word. There was no mention of any independent auditor. There was no mention of any custodial bank holding the fund's assets. The section on investor redemption rights included a clause allowing the fund manager to suspend redemptions indefinitely at their discretion, for any reason, without prior notice to investors. Any reason, without notice. I set the document down and sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Helen's herb garden was on the windowsill. The refrigerator hummed. I thought about my daughter driving home, the way she'd wrapped her hands around that mug. The 8 years that had passed since we invented a signal for situations like this, and the fact that it had taken one use to justify every year. I texted 2 people that night. The first was a woman named Irene Cho, who had been a securities examiner with the Ohio Division of Securities for 16 years before moving to the SEC's Regional Enforcement Office in Chicago. We'd worked overlapping cases 3 times in the late 2000s. She was meticulous, and she was fair, and she answered her texts more reliably than most people answered phone calls. The second was a man named Bo Strickland, who had spent 15 years as a CPA specializing in forensic accounting for a white-collar defense firm in Cincinnati before going independent. If there was a financial document built to deceive, Bo could locate the architecture of the deception faster than anyone I knew. I asked them both if they had 30 minutes the next morning. Irene called at 8. I gave her Corbin Lyle's name, Ridgeway Capital Group, LLC, and the Tempe address. She told me she'd look and call back. Bo called at 8:30. I read him sections of the memorandum. When I got to the redemption clause, he asked me to stop and read it again. I did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walt, there's no named custodian anywhere in this document. No. So there's no verifiable entity actually holding any assets." Correct. He said, "This is a promissory note dressed up as a private placement. The whole thing is a vehicle for collecting money," and then pointing to 41 pages of contractual ambiguity when someone asks where it went. He paused. "The performance projections, do they cite any source for historical returns?" "No auditor. No third-party verification. Just a chart." "Right. Because if you audit something, the audit exists. If there's nothing to audit, you just make a chart." He exhaled. "How much is at risk?" "Potentially 90,000. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Who is she to you?" "My daughter." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Walt. Let me know what you need." Irene called back at 10:15. Her voice had the particular flat quality of someone delivering information they wish was different. "Corbin Lyle," she said, 43, grew up outside Nashville, bachelor's in business from a small school in Tennessee. He worked 4 years at a legitimate commercial real estate brokerage in Dallas, left under circumstances that included a complaint filed with the Texas Real Estate Commission. The complaint was about an undisclosed referral arrangement with a private equity group. He was steering clients toward a fund that paid him a placement fee without telling the clients. The commission issued a cease and desist. He didn't renew his Texas license. She paused. He's had a Florida address, a Nevada LLC, and now apparently an Arizona presence in the last 4 years. Ridgeway Capital Group is not registered as an investment advisor or broker-dealer in any state. The fund is not registered with the SEC or any state securities regulator. It should be. At the investment levels described in that memorandum, it should absolutely be. I closed my eyes for a moment. "So it's unregistered and he's done a version of this before," I said. "A smaller version. A client in Dallas lost $22,000. The client was a retired school teacher, 64 years old. She had been his client for 2 years. She didn't pursue criminal charges because she'd trusted him and she was ashamed." Irene paused. "A dry run. That's what it looks like." The phrase landed the same way it always does. A dry run. A version run at smaller scale to test the mechanics, refine the approach, identify what creates compliance and what creates questions, and then apply the refined version to a larger target. The retired school teacher in Dallas had cost him his Texas license and $22,000 of someone else's money. He had learned from it. He had moved. He had gotten better. I sat with that for a while. Then I drove to Faye's apartment. She met me at the door in scrubs. She'd just come off a night shift, and her eyes had the particular exhausted flatness of 12 hours in a cardiac step-down unit. I felt something catch in my chest, the specific protectiveness of watching your adult child trying to hold multiple things at once without letting any of them go. We sat on her couch and I told her everything. The Tempe address, the missing custodian, Bo's reading of the redemption clause, the Texas complaint, the schoolteacher in Dallas, the $22,000. She sat very still through all of it, not crying, just still, the way she used to get still as a child, when something was genuinely frightening rather than just upsetting. When I finished, she said very quietly, "He told me he loved me." I didn't say anything. There's nothing you can say to that sentence that makes it land differently. It has to sit. After a while, she said she lost her retirement savings. 22,000 of it, I said. She had more. She said she got lucky it wasn't worse, that she'd sensed something was off before she committed more. Faye looked at her hands. "I almost didn't send you that text." She paused. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was looking for reasons to undermine something good because I wasn't used to things going well. She looked up. "That's the thing, isn't it? It's not that I'm stupid, it's that I talked myself out of what I already knew." "That's exactly what it is," I said. "That's how it works. They know that. They are counting on that." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do I need to do?" I explained it carefully. In Ohio, a one-party consent state, she could record a conversation she was party to without disclosure. I needed her to meet with Corbin in person, not at her apartment, somewhere neutral, and let him make the full pitch. Let him name the amount he expected her to commit. Let him describe the fund and the timeline and the transfer process. I needed the audio to be clean and incomplete and unambiguous. That meant she couldn't tip him off. She couldn't be cold or withdrawn. She had to be someone who was almost ready to say yes. She looked at me for a long moment with those steady brown eyes she'd had since she was 4 years old. "I've held the hand of people who are dying," she said. "I think I can sit across a table from someone I'm angry at." She texted him that afternoon and said she'd been thinking seriously about the fund and wanted to get together to go over a few things before committing. She said she'd been doing her own research and felt like she was close to being ready. He responded within 10 minutes. Warm. Pleased. He suggested a coffee place near his apartment on Thursday at 2. Exactly what someone who thought the close was nearly complete would do. Thursday morning I drove to her apartment. We sat at her kitchen table and I walked her through the mechanics, phone in the pocket of her cardigan, voice memo app running before she walked in. Let him talk. Let the silence go longer than felt comfortable. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral, curious tone. Not challenging, just thorough. The kind of thorough that reads as diligent rather than suspicious. Let him name the amount. Let him describe where the wire goes. Let him give her the account information. She nodded through all of it without writing anything down. She'd always had a nurse's retention for instruction. "How are you feeling?" I asked. She thought about it genuinely. "I feel like I'm going to a code," she said, "where you know it's bad, and you know what you have to do, and you just have to hold the feeling away from the function long enough to do the job." I knew what she meant. I'd had that feeling in rooms with people who'd stolen from widows and from churches and from small businesses, sitting across tables being warm and reasonable while I documented everything. You learn to put the anger in a room down the hall and close the door and work. I drove home and sat with Helen, and we didn't talk much. She had been a middle school teacher for 27 years and had a teacher's instinct for knowing when something needed words and when it needed company. She made coffee and we sat at the same kitchen table where I'd read the memorandum, and we listened to the radio. Faye texted at 4:08. "Done. Calling you in a few minutes." Her voice on the phone was calm but thin. The specific thin of adrenaline still metabolizing. She said he had been smooth and thorough. He had walked her through the fund structure with the memorandum open on the table. He had explained the preferred return tier, that committing $50,000 or more would put her in the first position for distributions, which would likely run 16 to 18% annually. He had told her the fund's manager had relationships with commercial tenants that other funds couldn't access. He had named the wire instructions, a bank in Nevada, an account held by an LLC called Ridgeway Capital Holdings, a different name than the one on the memorandum. He had told her that the fund operated through a holding structure to minimize tax friction. He had told her the deadline was the last Friday of the month and that he wished he could extend it for her. But the structure didn't allow for exceptions. He had told her he wanted her to be part of something that would take care of her. The fund operated through a holding structure to minimize tax friction. I knew what that phrase meant. It meant there was no verifiable connection between the money she would send and any real asset. The holding structure existed to put additional distance between her wire and any paper trail. By the time anyone looked, the LLC would be dissolved and the account emptied, and Corbin Lyle would be someone else in a different state. I called Irene that evening. I told her we had the recording. She asked Faye to send her the audio file securely. Faye did it within the hour. Irene listened to it that night. She called me the next morning at 7. "It's enough," she said. "The wire instructions alone, a different LLC than the one on the registration documents, a Nevada account, no audible connection to any stated asset, combined with the unregistered fund and his prior complaint history, we're moving this up." I didn't ask for the details after that. That wasn't my role and it wasn't Faye's. What I can tell you is that Corbin Lyle was picked up at his apartment on a Monday morning. Faye called me when it happened. She was standing in the parking lot of the hospital before her shift, and she said very quietly, They got him, Dad. Good, I said. Go take care of your patients. You did everything right. The investigation that followed revealed that Corbin had operated variations of the same scheme in 3 states over 6 years. The Ridgeway Capital Income Fund was the third iteration of a structurally identical fraud. Across all confirmed victims, 7 people that investigators could establish with certainty, the losses totaled just over $680,000. One of those victims was a 61-year-old man in Nevada who had lost most of what he'd saved for a retirement he'd been planning for a decade. Another was a 44-year-old woman in Florida who had put in $40,000 of her children's college fund because she had trusted someone who had spent 4 months convincing her she was making a smart decision. Faye had not lost a dollar. 2 weekends later, she came for Sunday dinner. Helen made her pot roast, the one she's been making since Faye was in grade school, and the 3 of us sat at the same kitchen table where I read a 41-page document until 1 in the morning and known, by page 12, exactly what it was. Faye was quieter than usual through most of dinner, not the wound-up quiet of before, something different. Settled. The kind of quiet that comes after something hard has finished. After dinner, when Helen went to call her sister, Faye pushed her coffee mug to the side and looked at me. I keep thinking about the woman in Florida, she said, the one who used her kids' college money. I know. She wasn't naive. She was trusting. There's a difference. There is, I said, and that distinction matters more than most people understand. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark. It was the kind of ordinary Tuesday evening sound that makes the kitchen feel very enclosed and very safe. I almost didn't send the text, she said again. She'd sent it once before and I'd let it go. This time felt different, like she needed to say it out loud enough times that it lost some of its weight. I know, I said. I've been telling myself for 2 weeks that I was overreacting, that I was looking for reasons to ruin something real because I didn't trust good things. She looked at her hands. He was very good at making me feel like skepticism was a character flaw. I let that sit for a moment because it was true and it was important and it deserved to be heard rather than papered over with reassurance. That's part of the design, I said. I want you to understand that clearly, not as comfort, as fact. The most effective financial predators don't look for people who are uninformed. They look for people who are emotionally open, who want to believe in something. The skepticism he was working to erode was the correct response to what was happening. He knew that. Dismantling it was part of the work he was doing on you, every day, from the beginning. She looked up. From the beginning. The warmth, the consistency, the way he remembered things about you, that's not necessarily false in the sense of being nothing. But it was deployed with a purpose. By the time he introduced the fund, you already had weeks of evidence that he was trustworthy. That was the investment he made before he asked you to make yours. She sat with that. I watched her process it the way she processed hard medical information, without flinching but with full attention. What do I hold on to from this? She asked. That the moment you felt something was wrong, you listened to it. You sat with it for 2 weeks and your brain kept coming up with reasons to dismiss it and you sent the text anyway. That instinct, trusting it over the voice that tells you you're being paranoid, is the thing that made every other thing possible. She nodded slowly. Most people don't, I said. That's the tragedy of these cases. Most people feel the wrongness and conclude they're the problem. They're embarrassed to say it out loud. They're afraid of what it would mean about the relationship if they were right. So they wait, and while they're waiting, the deadline closes and the wire goes through and the LLC dissolves and the person is on a plane. We sat for a while with the sound of Helen's voice drifting down from upstairs and the ordinary dark outside the kitchen window. Is the signal still good? Faye asked. I looked at her. I mean, do we keep it? She said. Or does it feel weird now? We keep it, I said. We've now confirmed it works. She laughed at that, a real laugh, small and sudden. The kind that breaks something loose that needed breaking. Helen came back downstairs, and the three of us moved to the living room and watched something mindless on television for an hour, and Helen fell asleep in the armchair before 9. And Faye and I sat in the comfortable quiet of people who have been through something and come out the other side and don't need to keep talking about it. There are things I want to say plainly, as someone who spent most of a career watching these cases unfold. Investment fraud works because it is built on something real. The human need to trust, to feel included, to believe that someone sees potential in you. The best operators are not con artists in the way people picture con artists. They are patient, warm, genuinely attentive. They build a relationship before they build a pitch. By the time they ask you for money, they've already given you something that feels like evidence of their character. The ask feels like a natural extension of care rather than what it actually is. The red flags are consistent enough that they're worth knowing. Any investment promising consistent returns above 8 or 9% annually deserves hard scrutiny. 14 to 19% is not aggressive, it's a fabrication. A fund with no verifiable registration with state or federal securities regulators is not operating in a gray area. It is operating illegally. A business address that turns out to be a registered agent service is not a minor administrative detail. It means the company has no physical presence. Deadline pressure is not a feature of legitimate investment structures. Real funds have real windows and real processes that don't require you to wire money by Friday. Resistance to having an independent attorney or accountant review documents is not impatience. It is a tell. In the United States, investment advisors and broker-dealers must be registered with the SEC or their state securities regulator. You can verify any advisor and any fund through the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database at advisorinfo.sex.gov and through FINRA BrokerCheck at brokercheck.das.nsis vibe by mine. 5 minutes could be the difference between keeping your savings and losing them. And this if someone in your life reaches out to you, in whatever form, with whatever signal they have, please hear it. Faye used a phrase we invented over a bad Thanksgiving 8 years ago for a completely different kind of problem. She used it because something in her knew, before she could fully articulate why, that she needed someone outside the situation to help her see it clearly. That instinct was correct. It is almost always correct. We didn't lose anything. The difference in the end was a 30-year-old woman sitting in a hospital parking lot before a 12-hour shift and deciding to trust what her gut had been telling her for 2 weeks. If something feels wrong, it is not nothing. The voice that tells you you're being paranoid is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's the last thing standing between you and the wire transfer screen. Trust the other voice. Reach out. Use whatever signal you have. I still think about the 41 pages I read alone at that kitchen table while Helen slept upstairs and the house was completely quiet. 14 to 19% annual returns. No auditor. A custodian that didn't exist. An address that cost less per month than a tank of gas. I've read hundreds of documents like it over the years, and the construction is always the same. Something built to look like substance while containing almost none. What changes is the person on the other end of it, the person who was told by someone they trusted that this was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Corbin didn't choose Faye randomly. He chose her because she was open. Because she was the kind of person who shows up fully to her patients, to her relationships, to the people she loves. That quality, the willingness to be present and trusting, is not a weakness. It is one of the finest things a person can be, and it is exactly what people like him look for. He spent 5 months making himself into evidence of his own trustworthiness. Every phone call returned, every small thing remembered, every evening that felt like proof. That was the investment he made before he ever opened the memorandum. He was patient because patience is what the scheme required. That's not intuition on his part. That's a method, refined across 3 states and 6 years and 7 people who lost real money that represented real years of real work. What stopped it was not luck. I want to be clear about that. What stopped it was a 30-year-old woman who had the integrity to take her own unease seriously rather than dismiss it as an inconvenience. Faye sat with a feeling for 2 weeks that her own mind kept trying to argue away, and she chose to trust the feeling over the argument. That's not a small thing. That is a form of moral courage that most people underestimate because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked like a 3-word text on a Tuesday night. But inside that text was the decision to say, something is wrong. I'm not crazy, and I'm going to ask for help rather than protect a story that isn't serving me. And then she had to walk into that coffee shop and sit across a table from someone she'd spent 5 months caring about and hold herself together long enough to do what needed to be done. She told me it felt like going into a code at work, where you know it's bad, and you know what you have to do, and you put the feeling in a room down the hall and close the door. That kind of discipline, the ability to act clearly under the weight of something genuinely painful, is not nothing. That is the specific kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, it just gets the job done. I think about the woman in Florida who put in $40,000 of her children's future. I think about the retired man in Nevada. I think about the school teacher in Dallas who was too ashamed to press charges. None of them were foolish. All of them were human in exactly the ways that schemes like this are designed to exploit. The difference between them and Faye was not intelligence. It was that Faye had built over years of small, honest conversations, the kind of relationship with me where using the signal felt possible, where asking for help didn't feel like failure. That is the thing I want people to hear more than anything else. Build those relationships before you need them. Teach your kids, whatever age they are, that reaching out is not weakness. Create the signal, whatever form it takes, and when someone uses it, drop everything. We kept ours. It still means exactly what it always meant.